At the busiest lunch hour in a small diner in Prescott, Arizona, something no one expected happened. Emily Carter, a young waitress known for remembering every regular's name, quietly used her meager tips to pay for the meal of a lonely veteran, Frank Walker. But before she could walk away, a harsh voice cut through the diner's warm buzz. "What do you think you're doing, Emily?" Greg Matheson, the manager, stepped out in front of everyone, his glare burning through any act of kindness. In that instant, the room seemed to freeze. Silverware paused midair. Haley Kim, the youngest server, held her breath. Frank's aged hands trembled, his thanks caught in his throat, forced to watch the only person who'd shown him compassion be fired on the spot. And that was only the beginning, because no one in the diner could have guessed who would walk in next, or how the entire town was about to change. Emily Carter wasn't just another waitress. For most of Prescott's regulars, she was the reason the Sunrise Diner felt like home. She moved with quiet purpose, filling coffee mugs before they ran dry, remembering whose knees ached in the rain, whose husband passed last winter. Her mother, now housebound by illness, depended on Emily's double shifts. Emily herself had grown up in this town. Her father a mechanic, her brother once a soldier before vanishing into the city's noise. Today, Emily's sneakers were still damp from the morning storm, her apron stained by spilled tomato soup, but she wore the tiredness with pride. The line at the register snaked out the door. Orders piled up. Greg's voice barked from the kitchen window, but Emily kept moving, polite and steady, never letting frustration reach her face. For a moment, between the clang of plates and the rush of footsteps, she saw Frank Walker, alone at the corner table, head bowed, hands folded as if in prayer, waiting, unseen by the world. Frank Walker had been sitting in that booth for almost 20 minutes, unnoticed by anyone except Emily. He wore an old army jacket, the elbows patched and threadbare, the faded name tag barely legible above his heart. His hair was snow-white, his eyes distant, focused on something far away. Maybe a memory, maybe just the rain sliding down the window. When Emily approached, she softened her voice. "Sir, are you all right? Would you like something to eat?" Frank blinked up at her, as if surprised someone had spoken. "Just a hot meal if you have it," he murmured. His hands shook as he searched his pockets for a few wrinkled bills, but came up short. Emily didn't hesitate. She slipped her own tip money into the register, nodding to Ricky, the cook, for a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, Frank's favorite, she learned long ago. As she set the plate in front of him, Frank's eyes shone with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he whispered. Emily smiled gently. "Maybe I did." Greg Matheson had been watching the whole exchange from behind the counter, his arms crossed tight, jaw clenched. The second he saw Emily slip money from her apron into the till and serve Frank, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The clatter of forks and voices faded as he stepped out from the kitchen, his presence heavy and unwelcome. He called out, louder than necessary, "Emily, what's going on here?" Every head in the diner turned. Emily straightened, heart pounding, but her voice stayed calm. "Frank just needed a meal. I paid for it myself." Greg's lips twisted in disdain. "We have rules for a reason. You don't get to decide who eats for free." Emily met his gaze, her hands steady. No one should go hungry here, not in this town. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The tension hung in the air, thick as the Arizona heat outside. Frank sat silently, eyes fixed on the plate, afraid to move, afraid to make things worse. For a moment, no one in the diner dared to speak. Greg's glare swept across the room, daring anyone to defend Emily. The regulars, the same faces Emily had greeted every morning for years, looked away, pretending to study their menus. Haley Kim, standing frozen near the coffee pot, clutched her order pad to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Even Ricky, behind the kitchen pass, hesitated, wiping his hands on his apron. Emily felt the weight of their silence settle on her shoulders. Still, she refused to look away. "If helping someone costs me my job," she said quietly, "then maybe this isn't the place I thought it was." Greg's face flushed, but before he could reply, Frank shifted in his seat, trying to stand. His voice, though trembling, was clear. "She's the only reason I came in here today." The words hung in the air, echoing off the tile and chrome. Impossible to ignore. Greg's patience snapped. "Sit down, sir. This isn't your concern." His tone was sharp, dismissive, but the diner had already changed. Haley took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily's helped all of us." Ricky called out from the kitchen. "She covers shifts when no one else will, Greg." A couple near the window exchanged glances. Then one of them spoke up. "She remembered my mother's birthday when no one else did." Greg ignored them, focusing all his frustration on Emily. "Hand me your apron. You're done here," he ordered, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. Emily's hands trembled as she untied the apron, but she didn't cry. She looked at Frank, his eyes wet with something more than age, and forced a smile. "Thank you for your service, Frank. Don't let one bad day make you forget who you are." As she turned to leave, the diner seemed to hold its breath, every soul inside wondering what would happen next. Emily stepped out into the midday sun, her hand still clutching the folded apron as if it held the last piece of her dignity. The dry Arizona air stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. Behind her, the diner door swung shut, muffling the voices and the uncertain silence she left behind. She stood on the sidewalk, heart pounding, trying to steady her breath. All those years, all those double shifts, gone in a moment of compassion. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, just a simple, "How's your day, Em?" She stared at the screen, unable to reply, not wanting to burden her with the truth. Inside, she could see Frank still sitting at the booth, staring at his untouched meal. Emily closed her eyes, fighting the urge to cry, wondering if doing the right thing was always supposed to feel this lonely. For the first time in years, she didn't know where to go next. Inside the diner, the mood had shifted. Where there had once been idle chatter and the clinking of coffee cups, now there was a heavy hush. Frank sat alone, his meal growing cold, his hands resting uselessly in his lap. He looked around at the faces, some filled with pity, some with shame, but most simply avoided his eyes. Greg moved stiffly behind the counter, pretending to rearrange receipts, but his bluster had faded. Ricky glanced out from the kitchen, his jaw tight, while Haley hovered near the door, torn between fear and the urge to follow Emily. One customer, a retired nurse named Linda, finally broke the silence. "That girl was the only reason I came in here every Thursday," she said, voice trembling. Others murmured their agreement, but none dared speak too loud. Frank finally stood, his body aching, and slipped a small, battered medal from his pocket, setting it quietly on the edge of his table. For a moment it glinted in the sunlight, a silent reminder of sacrifices no one seemed willing to remember. The sunlight caught the edge of Frank's medal, drawing more eyes to his table. A young man near the window, usually lost in his phone, lowered his screen and watched. Haley, unable to hold back any longer, hurried over. "Frank, do you want me to call someone for you?" she asked softly. Frank shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one left to call." His words lingered in the air, heavy with a loneliness few understood. He glanced down at the medal, a purple heart, battered but proud, and sighed. "You know, sometimes the hardest battles aren't on any battlefield. Sometimes it's just trying to find a place where you still belong." Haley's eyes filled with tears. Ricky stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands, and joined them. He looked at Frank, then at Greg, then finally spoke. "Maybe we forgot what matters. Maybe it's time we remembered." The room grew quieter still, the moment stretching. Fragile, uncertain, but full of something that almost felt like hope. The bell above the diner door jingled, breaking the silence. Every head turned. 4 men in crisp marine uniforms stepped inside, their boots striking the tile with quiet authority. They didn't need to announce themselves. Their presence alone changed the air. The tallest, a sergeant with deep lines etched across his face, scanned the room until his eyes landed on Frank. He nodded in respect. "Mr. Walker, we got your message." Frank blinked, surprised, then managed a faint smile. Greg straightened behind the counter, trying to regain his composure. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his tone forced. The sergeant shook his head. "We're here for him, and for the one who showed him kindness." For a long moment, no one spoke. Ricky and Haley exchanged glances, unsure what would come next. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath, sensing something extraordinary was about to unfold. Sergeant Mason stepped forward, his medals gleaming against his dark uniform. He addressed the entire diner, his voice calm but commanding. "There are some debts that can't be paid with money, only with respect." He turned to Greg. "We heard that a good woman lost her job here today because she did the right thing for a veteran." Greg bristled, folding his arms. "We have policies. We can't just give away food." The sergeant's gaze didn't waver. "Policies don't feed hungry souls, sir. Compassion does." A murmur ran through the room. Even customers who had never spoken up before found themselves nodding. Frank, watching quietly, felt something shift inside him. A burden lifting, just a little. Haley glanced out the window as if hoping Emily might somehow return. Sergeant Mason continued, "We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to remind this town what it means to honor those who serve, and those who serve them, too." The silence that followed was heavy, but different now. It held the weight of truth and the possibility of change. Greg tried to steady himself, but the room was no longer on his side. "Look, it's just a business. If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" His words fell flat. A regular at the counter, an older woman named Mrs. Thompson, finally spoke up. "It ends with doing what's right, Greg. That's where it ends." Her voice was soft but firm. Ricky stepped out from behind the pass, wiping his hands on a towel, and faced Greg. "You always say we're a family here. But what kind of family turns its back on its own?" The Marines stood silent, their presence more powerful than any speech. Frank's hands trembled as he picked up his medal. "I fought for this country, and I'd do it again," he said, voice cracking. "But today, a waitress fought for me, and you fired her for it." The truth of his words hung in the air, undeniable. For the first time, Greg had nothing to say. A ripple of discomfort spread through the diner. Customers shifted in their seats, a few glancing at the door as if considering leaving, but most stayed, compelled by the gravity of what was happening. Haley took a deep breath and found her courage. "Emily's the only one who checked on me when I started here," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "She walked me to my car after late shifts, even when she was exhausted." Ricky nodded. "She covered my rent once when my paycheck was short, never even asked for it back." Mrs. Thompson wiped a tear from her eye. "Emily remembered my husband's birthday, even though he's gone." The Marines exchanged quiet glances, their respect for Emily growing with each story. Frank looked around the room, hope flickering in his tired eyes. For the first time in a long while, he felt less alone. The silence that followed was heavy with both regret and the first hints of solidarity. Outside, Emily lingered on the sidewalk, uncertain, her apron still clutched tightly in her hands. She could see movement through the diner's big front window. People gathered around Frank's table, voices raised in ways she'd never heard before. Part of her wanted to keep walking, to leave the pain behind, but something rooted her to the spot. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her mother, this one simply, "Love you, Em." Emily took a shaky breath and glanced back at the door. Inside, the Marines stood with Frank, and more customers were now speaking up, some even standing, their voices growing stronger. For the first time, Emily realized that one small act of kindness had shaken something deep in her community. The fear and doubt still clung to her, but a new feeling flickered beneath. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she felt. Back inside, the atmosphere continued to shift. Greg, still behind the counter, tried to reassert control. "Enough!" he snapped, raising his voice. This isn't a charity. If anyone else wants to give away food, they can join Emily outside. He expected silence, maybe compliance. Instead, a slow, determined voice answered from the kitchen. Maybe we will. Ricky untied his apron and placed it on the counter beside Emily's. Haley followed, her hands shaking, but her chin lifted with resolve. A customer near the window, an older man who'd barely spoken before, stood and laid a $20 bill next to Frank's plate. For his meal and for her kindness, he said. Others followed suit, some leaving money, others murmuring their support. For Greg, every gesture felt like sand slipping through his fingers. The authority he'd clung to was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by something bigger than rules, a quiet uprising of decency. Greg's frustration boiled over. He slammed his hand on the counter. Fine, go ahead, all of you. See how long this place lasts without order? But his words sounded hollow, drowned out by the gentle clatter of people rising from their seats, gathering their things. Ricky, now standing beside Haley, faced Greg squarely. A diner without kindness isn't worth running, Greg. Frank stood as well, slow but steady, his Purple Heart medal still resting on the table. He looked Greg in the eye. You forgot what matters, he said quietly, voice thick with years of service and sorrow. The Marines stood silent but watchful, their presence a silent warning that some battles are fought with dignity, not anger. Around them, customers continued to leave money and soft words of encouragement. For the first time, Greg felt truly alone in his own diner, the walls echoing with everything he had failed to understand. As the last of the regulars filtered out, Greg stood motionless behind the counter, his authority shrinking with every departing customer. The diner, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt hollow, empty booths, half-eaten meals, and a lingering sense of loss. Ricky handed his apron to Haley, who gripped it tightly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. We were more than staff, Greg, she said softly. We were a family, until today. The Marines nodded in silent agreement, their respect for the staff evident in their calm, upright stance. Frank lingered near his booth, the Purple Heart still shining on the tabletop. He turned to Greg one last time. Sometimes it's not the war that breaks you. It's forgetting the reason you fought in the first place. With that, Frank straightened his shoulders and followed the others out into the bright Arizona sun, leaving Greg alone in the silence he'd created. Outside, the sun felt brighter than before, almost too sharp against Emily's tired eyes. She saw Ricky and Haley step onto the sidewalk, both looking uncertain but oddly relieved. Frank joined them, his step slow but purposeful, the Purple Heart pinned to his chest once more. The Marines exited in a line behind him, forming a quiet honor guard as they crossed the parking lot. A small crowd had gathered, curious neighbors, passers-by, even a reporter from the local paper with a notepad ready. Ricky gave Emily a reassuring nod. Haley rushed to her side and hugged her tightly. Frank stopped in front of Emily, meeting her gaze. You reminded us all what it means to care, he said, his voice soft but steady. Around them, the sense of isolation faded, replaced by a fragile but growing feeling of unity. For the first time since leaving the diner, Emily allowed herself a genuine, hopeful smile. The crowd outside the diner seemed to grow, drawing in people from nearby shops and even a few drivers who pulled over, curious about the commotion. Emily stood at the center, surrounded by former co-workers and strangers alike. Someone handed her a bottle of water. Another pressed a folded note of encouragement into her palm. Frank remained beside her, his presence grounding, the Purple Heart now a beacon that drew respectful nods from fellow veterans in the crowd. A local news van pulled up, and the reporter quickly approached, microphone in hand. Emily, can you tell us what happened? Emily hesitated, her voice shaking at first. I just did what felt right. No one should be punished for kindness. The reporter nodded, recording every word. Ricky spoke up too, adding, She's the heart of that diner. Without her, it's just four walls and a grill. Across the parking lot, even Greg watched through the diner's window, unable to escape the impact of a single, selfless choice that had changed the whole town. As the reporter wrapped up her questions, more voices from the crowd joined in. An elderly man in a faded navy cap spoke up. "We need more Emilys in this world." Others murmured their agreement, and a few began sharing their own stories of service, sacrifice, or the small acts of kindness that had changed their lives. For the first time, Emily felt the support of her community. People who'd been strangers only minutes before now stood together, united by a simple act of compassion. Frank placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "This isn't just about a meal," he said quietly. "It's about being seen, being remembered." Emily blinked back tears. Nearby, Haley and Ricky started talking with the Marines about how the community could better support veterans. The sense of hope and purpose grew stronger with every conversation. In that parking lot, under the Arizona sun, it was clear. What started with a single plate of food was becoming something much bigger. A movement built on empathy and respect. Word spread quickly. Within the hour, someone had uploaded a video of the confrontation and the Marines' arrival to social media. Comments poured in, some from across the state, others from veterans groups nationwide. Messages of encouragement and outrage flooded the diner's website. Emily's phone buzzed again and again with notifications she could barely keep up with. "Thank you for standing up. You're a hero in my book. This is what America should look like." Across the street, the old pharmacy owner stepped outside, waving Emily over. He pressed a business card into her hand. "If you ever need work, my door's open," he said. More offers followed from neighbors, even people she barely knew. The Marines, sensing the shift, stepped aside to let the community's voice rise. Frank watched it all quietly, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "You see, Emily," he murmured, voice thick. "One small kindness, and suddenly the world remembers what matters." The pain of the morning hadn't vanished, but hope was clearly taking root. As afternoon shadows stretched across the parking lot, Emily found herself at the center of an impromptu circle. Neighbors, veterans, and former customers standing shoulder to shoulder. Haley squeezed Emily's hand, her eyes shining with pride. Ricky recounted stories of Emily's small, everyday kindnesses to anyone who would listen. Frank stood quietly beside them, metal glinting in the sun, a silent symbol of sacrifice and survival. The Marines exchanged words with local officials who had arrived, suggesting ways the town could better support its veterans. Free meals, support groups, job training. For once, Greg stood outside the diner's glass, invisible and irrelevant to the conversation swirling around Emily. The sense of belonging she'd lost just hours before was now coming back to her, piece by piece, through the gratitude and admiration of her community. As people began dispersing, a woman from the local newspaper snapped a photo of Emily with Frank and Haley. A new memory, built on compassion, that would soon appear on every front page in Prescott. As evening approached, Emily finally found a quiet moment away from the crowd. She sat on the curb beside Frank, both of them watching the slow flow of traffic and listening to the distant hum of voices. Frank broke the silence first, his tone gentle but weighted with history. "I fought in wars overseas, but sometimes the hardest fights are right here at home. Not every wound is visible, Emily. Some of us carry them in silence for years." Emily nodded, letting his words settle. "You shouldn't have to fight for dignity, not after everything you've given." Frank looked at her, his expression softening. "It's not about me anymore. It's about making sure the next old soldier isn't invisible. Today you did that." Emily smiled, humbled. For a moment, the pain and confusion of the day faded, replaced by a simple peace. A quiet understanding that one act of kindness could ripple through generations, changing the world in small but powerful ways. A cool breeze drifted through the air as the last sunlight faded over Prescott's main street. Emily and Frank sat together in comfortable silence, their shoulders almost touching. Haley joined them, handing Emily a paper cup of coffee. "You changed more than you know today," she whispered. Ricky came over, sitting on the curb with them, and for the first time all day, they laughed. A real, gentle laugh that lifted the heaviness from their hearts. Down the street, the old diner's neon sign flickered on, but inside, it was nearly empty. Through the glass, Greg could be seen alone, head in his hands, the reality of his choices settling over him like dusk. Across the lot, the Marines prepared to leave, stopping to thank Emily and offer Frank a ride home. "We take care of our own," one said, nodding with respect. Emily looked around at her small circle, feeling the warmth of a newfound community. She realized she hadn't lost everything. She'd found something new, something that mattered more. That night, Emily walked home beneath a sky scattered with stars, her heart lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. She paused outside her apartment, phone in hand, and finally answered her mother's messages. "I'm okay, Mom. Things are changing, but I'm not alone." Inside, she set her apron on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment, a symbol of all she'd lost, but also of what she'd stood for. Meanwhile, at the Sunrise Diner, Greg sat in the dim light scrolling through negative comments online. "A place with no soul," one read. "Shame on the manager." Each word chipped away at the certainty he'd once felt. For years he'd believed that rules kept the world in order. Now, he saw how easily those rules could be twisted, how quickly respect could be lost. Elsewhere, Frank's apartment was brighter than usual, with the Purple Heart placed on his nightstand. He smiled quietly, grateful for a meal, for dignity, for the spark of hope Emily had given him, and, by extension, the entire town. The next morning, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Emily awoke to dozens of messages, some from old friends, some from strangers moved by the video now circulating online. Local news vans lined Prescott's narrow streets, and neighbors stopped her on the sidewalk to offer hugs and thanks. "You made us proud," one elderly woman said, pressing a home-baked pie into Emily's hands. At the diner, things were different. Only a handful of unfamiliar faces trickled in, their curiosity quickly replaced by disappointment at the empty tables and uneasy silence. Greg tried to act unfazed, but each passing minute felt heavier. Haley and Ricky, now jobless but undeterred, met Emily at the town square. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning for us," Ricky said, hopeful. Emily smiled, surrounded by friends who'd become family, and realized that even as one door closed, the world outside had grown wider, more welcoming, and filled with possibility. By midday, the Prescott community had rallied in unexpected ways. The local hardware store hung a sign, "Veterans and Kind Hearts Welcome." The bakery posted a flyer offering free coffee to former service members, inspired by Emily's gesture. On social media, messages multiplied. "Stand with." Emily trended across the region. People shared stories of times when small acts of kindness had changed their lives, tagging friends and family to remind them that good still existed. Frank walked through town with a lighter step, receiving handshakes and smiles from neighbors who'd never spoken to him before. At the diner, Greg watched as another table sat empty. Each lost customer felt like a fresh sting, and for the first time, he wondered if his rules had truly served anyone at all. Meanwhile, Emily and her friends were invited to speak at the local library that weekend, asked to share their experience and what they'd learned about courage, community, and the simple, enduring power of kindness. That afternoon, Emily found herself seated at the library's sunlit meeting room, a little nervous as the seats filled with familiar faces, neighbors, veterans, young families, and even a few reporters. Frank sat in the front row, his hands folded over his cane, nodding encouragement. Haley and Ricky flanked Emily at the table, ready to add their voices. Emily cleared her throat, her voice steady but warm. "When I helped Frank, I didn't think it would change anything for anyone but him. I just didn't want him to feel invisible." Ricky spoke next, sharing how kindness had shaped his life in small ways, and Haley told of how Emily's support made her feel safe on the toughest nights. As they spoke, heads nodded throughout the room, tears glistened in some eyes, and a sense of connection grew. Frank's turn came last. He rose, unsteady but proud, and faced the crowd. Sometimes the smallest thing, a hot meal, a kind word, can remind a man he's not alone. That's all I ever wanted. The applause that followed was long and genuine, echoing through every corner of the library. After the event, people lingered, eager to shake hands, share stories, and express their gratitude. The library buzzed with warmth, a sense of unity filling the space. A young woman approached Emily, her father, a Vietnam veteran, standing quietly beside her. "He never talks about his service," the daughter said softly. "But today, he told me what kindness like yours means to men like him. Thank you." Emily smiled, moved beyond words. Frank found himself surrounded by fellow veterans, some he hadn't seen in years. Old wounds and memories were quietly acknowledged. A squeeze of the shoulder, a nod, a brief embrace. For the first time in a long while, Frank felt the comfort of being understood, his burdens a little lighter for being shared. Outside, the town's mayor offered to host a community appreciation dinner for veterans and their families. "It's time Prescott remembers those who've given so much," she announced. Emily glanced around at the friends and neighbors gathering close and realized that one act of kindness truly had the power to heal far more than she ever imagined. As plans for the community dinner took shape, Emily received a call from Charles Freeman, director of the Walker Veteran Support Center. His voice was warm, full of gratitude. "Emily, we've followed what happened. Your actions showed courage and heart, exactly what we value here. Would you consider joining our team? We need people who understand what service really means." Emily hesitated, hope and nerves tangled in her chest. "I've never worked anywhere but the diner," she admitted. Charles laughed kindly. "That just means you know what it takes to make people feel welcome. And Frank has already spoken highly of you." Emily glanced at Frank, who offered a proud nod from across the room. "We'd be lucky to have you," Charles added. With encouragement from her friends, Emily accepted the offer. As she hung up, Haley squeezed her hand. "You deserve this, Em." For the first time since losing her job, Emily felt not just relief, but a genuine sense of purpose, like she was right where she belonged. The news of Emily's new job spread quickly through Prescott, adding another ripple of hope to the community's recovery. At the next morning's town meeting, neighbors applauded when Emily was introduced as the newest member of the Walker Veteran Support Center team. Frank beamed from the front row, his pride unmistakable. Even some of the town's most reserved elders voiced their approval, sharing stories of their own struggles and the comfort of finally feeling seen. Later that day, Emily started her first shift at the center. The walls were lined with photos of local heroes, smiling in uniforms, some gone, most still part of the fabric of the town. Emily helped veterans fill out paperwork, listened to their stories, and poured cups of coffee with the same gentle care she'd shown at the diner. The veterans responded quickly to her kindness, finding it easy to trust her. For Emily, each grateful smile, each story shared was a reminder. Sometimes the greatest battles were fought not for glory, but for belonging. Here, she knew her compassion mattered, and it was changing lives, one small act at a time. As Emily settled into her new role, she realized how deeply the veterans needed someone to simply listen. Many came in stoic, haunted by memories, or weighed down by daily struggles. Some carried visible scars, others bore wounds no one could see. She learned to recognize the signs: restless hands, distant eyes, voices that trailed off into silence. Frank visited often, sometimes helping new arrivals navigate the maze of forms, sometimes just sitting quietly in the lounge with other veterans, sharing coffee and memories. On one quiet afternoon, a former Marine named Dennis arrived at the center, reluctant to speak. Emily offered him a seat and warm coffee, giving him space to open up. Slowly, Dennis revealed his battles with sleepless nights, his sense of isolation since returning home. Emily listened without judgment, offering gentle reassurance. "You're not alone here," she told him. Everyone here knows what it's like to feel lost and what it means to find your way back. Through her kindness, Emily helped veterans like Dennis rediscover a sense of belonging, reminding them that even the deepest pain could be softened by understanding and connection. Word about the center's new energy continued to spread. Veterans who had once avoided public gatherings now started coming in, sometimes for help, sometimes just for a cup of coffee and a familiar face. The waiting area was filled with quiet conversation, gentle laughter, and the occasional sound of a guitar as one old army buddy strummed a tune from their youth. Emily became a fixture at the front desk, greeting everyone by name, making sure no one felt invisible. One day, Haley stopped by after her own job search, bringing a box of homemade cookies. She joined Emily and a small group of veterans at a round table, where stories flowed freely of battles fought, families lost and found, and the unexpected challenges of coming home. As the sun streamed through the window, Dennis, the Marine Emily had helped, stood up to thank her. "You saw me," he said simply, his voice full of emotion. "That's what we all need most." In that moment, Emily understood that the smallest gestures, a smile, a listening ear, a shared memory, could become lifelines for those who needed them most. On the walk home that evening, Emily reflected on how her life had changed in just a few days. Once her world had been limited to the diner and her mother's small apartment. Now she was part of something larger, a network of people bound not just by their struggles, but by the compassion and strength they found in one another. At her apartment, Emily found a letter waiting for her. It was from Ellen Brooks, the diner's co-owner, who had watched the fallout from afar. Ellen wrote with genuine regret, apologizing for Greg's actions and for letting the diner lose its heart. She enclosed a personal check, asking Emily to use it however she saw fit. For your family or for the veterans, or just to remind yourself that the world needs more people like you. Emily was moved to tears. She set the letter aside and called her mother, sharing the news and the hope that things really were changing for the better. As she hung up, Emily looked out over Prescott's twinkling lights and felt the rarest of gifts, a sense of belonging and the knowledge that at last she was making a difference. Days passed, and Prescott buzzed with anticipation for the upcoming Community Appreciation Dinner. Flyers decorated every storefront and phone poles, inviting veterans and their families to be honored guests. Local businesses donated food, music, and decorations, each hoping to be part of something meaningful. Emily spent her days helping coordinate, working alongside Frank and the staff at the support center. Haley and Ricky volunteered too, eager to give back. On the night of the event, the town hall was aglow with string lights and filled with laughter, stories, and the warm scent of home-cooked meals. Emily greeted guests at the door, embracing old friends and new faces alike. Frank took his seat of honor at the main table, surrounded by fellow veterans. The mayor stood to give a speech, her voice steady. "Tonight, we remember those who served and those who remind us what real service looks like." Emily felt pride blossom in her chest. Looking around at the room full of smiling faces, she knew she had helped start a tradition that would last for years, a celebration not only of sacrifice, but of the enduring power of kindness and community. As dinner plates were cleared and music began to play, Emily wandered through the hall, soaking in the laughter and lively conversations. She paused by Frank's table, watching him surrounded by friends old and new, his burdens lifted, at least for tonight. Frank caught her eye and gestured for her to join them. When she did, he pressed her hand and whispered, "You gave us more than a meal, Emily. You gave us a reason to gather again." Nearby, Ricky and Haley were deep in conversation with local business owners about new opportunities and ways to support the center. Veterans from different generations swapped stories, bridging gaps of age and experience. The mayor stopped by to personally thank Emily for her courage, and even the local reporter, who'd first covered the diner incident, offered a quiet word of appreciation. For Emily, the night felt like both an ending and a beginning, a moment when a whole town came together, reminded of the simple truth that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could echo farther than anyone expected. Late in the evening, as the hall emptied and only a handful of guests lingered, Emily stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was quiet and cool, the stars brilliant above Prescott's rooftops. Frank joined her, settling onto the steps beside her with a satisfied sigh. For a long time, I thought people had forgotten us, Frank said softly, gazing up at the sky. Tonight, I remembered that kindness has a way of bringing people back together. Even after all these years, it still matters. Emily smiled, comforted by his words. You're not invisible anymore, Frank. None of you are. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the glow of the town hall spilling out behind them. Frank handed her the Purple Heart medal he'd carried all week. Keep this for me, he said. It's a reminder of what we can survive and what we can change, together. Emily cradled the medal in her hands, feeling the weight of both its history and its hope. She realized this was more than just an ending. It was a new beginning, not just for her, but for her entire town. The following morning, sunlight poured into Emily's apartment as she carefully set Frank's Purple Heart on the kitchen table. She traced its worn edges, remembering every moment that had brought her here. The courage it took to speak up, the loneliness that followed, and the unexpected wave of community that rose to meet her. Her phone buzzed with new messages. Thank yous from veterans, invitations to speak at nearby towns, and a heartfelt note from her old co-worker at the diner who wrote, "You taught us what matters, Emily. We're all better for it." As she made her way to the support center, she passed neighbors who smiled and waved, no longer strangers but friends. At the Walker Veteran Support Center, Emily hung the medal in a small display case by the entrance, alongside photos of local veterans. Frank watched quietly, nodding in approval. That's where it belongs, he said. With the people who remember. Emily stood back, pride and humility swelling in her chest. In that moment, she understood. Kindness wasn't a single act. It was a legacy carried forward by every hand willing to help. That afternoon, Emily welcomed a new veteran through the center's doors, a woman named Maria, nervous and unsure, her hands trembling as she explained she'd just moved to Prescott. Emily greeted her with warmth and offered her a seat. Frank soon joined them, sharing a gentle smile and a few words of encouragement. Maria relaxed, and within minutes, laughter and stories began to fill the room again. Outside, the news of Prescott's transformation had reached neighboring towns. More veterans came, hoping for the same sense of belonging. Community members volunteered, offering their time and skills to help build an even stronger network of support. Emily found herself busier than ever, but she thrived in the center's steady hum of purpose and hope. Each day she saw how a single spark of compassion could ignite change far beyond what she'd ever imagined. The old wounds, both seen and unseen, were being tended to, not just with resources, but with genuine understanding and care. Prescott had become more than a place on the map. It was now a home where no one had to feel invisible again. As the sun set over Prescott, the Walker Veteran Support Center glowed with quiet life, a steady stream of voices, laughter, and shared memories. Emily paused in the doorway, watching Maria, Frank, and others gathered around a table, their burdens eased by community and care. The Purple Heart shone softly in its case, a symbol of struggle and healing now embraced by all. Emily took a deep breath, her heart full. She knew the pain of being cast out and the risk of standing up for what's right. But she also knew something greater. Kindness could turn loneliness into belonging, and a single act of courage could spark a movement that touched an entire town. Looking back, Emily realized she hadn't just helped one veteran, she'd awakened a community's conscience. Prescott was changed forever, its spirit rekindled by the simple truth that no one should be invisible, and that respect, once given, could ripple outward, changing lives. If this story moves you, remember, the world needs more hands willing to reach out, more hearts brave enough to care. Share kindness and watch what grows.